I started in community college and now I'm in my PhD program. If you're new here, my name is Lauren. I'm a PhD student in robotics and computer science, and this is my channel. Now, if my eyes seem really red and puffy, I am struggling with seasonal allergies right now, but this is also quite an emotional topic for me, so I'm not crying, you're crying. Okay, let's get into it. There's a lot of stigma about community college. In the US, it's also called junior college sometimes, but it's the same concept. It's more of a 2-year degree, and it's generally seen as less prestigious than a 4-year university. I know I'm not the only person who at one point thought that they would never amount to anything because their only option was to go to 2-year school. And I'm here to tell you that it worked out okay for me, and it can work out okay for you too. Let me back up a bit because I wasn't always a bad student. In fact, in elementary school, I was really engaged and I was working pretty hard. But that all stopped when I hit about the 6th grade, and I really started to lose interest in school altogether. I stopped finding school interesting at all. I wasn't really making friends with a lot of people that I enjoyed being around. I wasn't engaged in the community at school, and I wasn't really engaged in learning anything. I pretty much would only do sports, and that was about the only thing I cared about. I wasn't particularly happy doing anything except playing sports, and so that made going to school pretty much a drag. I started to realize that you could do moderately well in school with very little effort, and so year after year, the amount of effort I was putting into learning was less and less and less. By the time I hit high school, I was doing the absolute bare minimum needed to get very mediocre grades. And this was particularly bad for me in math. I bought into the narrative that I just wasn't a math person, and I completely checked out. I ended up transferring to a different high school partway through high school, and that helped a lot with feeling more engaged and feeling like I was in a better community. But by that point, I was really far behind, especially in math. So I was basically scraping by, and I think my junior year, I got like a C- in pre-calculus, and then my senior year of high school, I got a D- in calculus, which for those unfamiliar with the system is like the only level above a failing grade. And really I deserved the failing grade, but bless my teacher, Mrs. Romans, she carried me to the end and made sure I could graduate by giving me a D- and letting me graduate from high school. When you think of the average kid who's going to go to engineering school after high school, I was definitely not the kid you would have thought of because my math grades were abysmal and I had very little interest in even applying to college, let alone going to college. I definitely had some conversations with a few adults who suggested I was more of a work with your hands type of person, and that's such a damaging comment in so many different ways, but I had already had it in my head that I wasn't college material, that I definitely wasn't a math person anyways, so I wasn't even really motivated or demotivated by that comment. I kind of just cruised on with my life. I had never really been bought into the idea of going to college. So even though I wasn't super good at math, I was very good at tracking my expenses in a spreadsheet and figuring out what I needed in terms of a budget. For some reason that clicked for me right away, and I realized that financial independence was really, really important to me. So at the time, I looked at the cost of going to college versus the degree options that were going to be available to me as somebody with no AP classes on their transcript and very poor grades in math. And I realized that there was very little ROI, very little return on investment for me in going to college. And so I really didn't even want to go. There's also a lot of anti-higher education rhetoric online. So if you're somebody who reads a lot online, and that's sort of how I grew up, was as this online communities were really flourishing, I really bought into that narrative that you didn't need to go to college, that you should be learning skills on the job, and that you would train up and work your way up, and you'd be better off doing that than going to college. I think that's well-intentioned advice. I don't think people mean that to be so negative, but it does have consequences, because for those of us who aren't as accepted in the trades or who are going to have a difficult time becoming an apprentice in the trade industry, it is actually quite difficult to build a career without a college degree. I tried multiple different jobs. I worked in retail thinking I was going to be like a retail manager. I worked as an administrative assistant for a bunch of different types of roles. And I always came up against this ceiling that was like any position that required a promotion of any kind, they always brought somebody else in who had a college degree. And my name was never even considered. So I realized that not having a college degree was really hurting my chances of working up the ladder and having any type of career growth and career advancement. And I was really frustrated by that. So I realized I needed a degree and I needed a plan. At that point, I hadn't taken any of the college entrance exams like the SAT or ACT, and I did not have the scores from my high school transcript that would have allowed me to transfer directly into a 4-year university. My grades just weren't good enough and I didn't meet the entrance requirements anyways. So I really had no option but to go to a 2-year community college where I could build up some credits, take some college credits at a fraction of the cost, and then try to apply to a 4-year school. The other advantage to community college was that by that point I was working full-time and I really needed something that was flexible around my job. Even though it was more flexible and the classes were more suited to people who were working, there was still a semester where I had to use my paid time off from work, which was only 10 business days a year. This is America. And I had to use that paid time off to leave work early to go to campus and take my physics class because they only offered it during working hours. And if you get off sequence sometimes, you can delay yourself by a year from eligibility for the application cycle. So I just used my vacation time to take a physics class. So all that time I was working and taking classes whenever I could. And it was grueling. It's a really tough schedule to do that. Work and school at the same time is challenging for anybody to do. I had to take calculus 1 through 3. I needed differential equations. I needed physics 1 and 2 and chemistry 1 and 2. And I also took a couple of gen ed requirements like ethics, so I could get those out of the way at a cheaper school than when I transferred to 4-year school. But even so, I wasn't actually eligible to go directly into calculus. I've been out of school for so long and I couldn't really do much math, so I couldn't pass the placement exams. I actually had to go back and take algebra and then pre-calculus and then calculus because I just wasn't really prepared. But I did get Student of the Semester in Calculus award. So there you go. Now, in the back of my head this whole time, I'm still bought into that narrative that I'm just not a math person and someday somebody is gonna figure out that I don't belong here. But I just kept going and tried not to think about it too hard. Now, the benefit of having been out in the workforce before going to college is that I really knew what my other options were and I knew they were far worse. I knew that if I didn't go to school and I didn't get some type of practical degree, that I was going to be scraping by for the rest of my life. And I just wasn't ready to accept that fate for myself. I just wanted better for myself and I was trying to put the work in to get there. I had this feeling like I have to try to do this, or I will live with the regret of not trying for the rest of my life. It was a really, really tough few years. I was eventually able to drop to a part-time job instead of a full-time job, which helped a lot with allowing me to focus more on classes. But that of course meant taking a pay cut. So I now made a lot less money and financially the budget was tighter. And this was my first experience with burnout. I actually didn't even realize that that's what was happening at the time. So culturally, talking about burnout wasn't really that accepted yet, and I didn't have any awareness of what that term meant. So I literally thought I had a learning disability. I hit a wall and I couldn't focus. I felt like my memory was shot. I couldn't memorize things. I was really struggling with recall. I just couldn't seem to get through all the work that I needed to get through. I struggled with that for at least a semester, just like hanging on. But that semester, and I can still remember it, I was in my Chem 2 class and I remember that the admissions decisions for Georgia Tech, which was my 4-year state school, admissions decisions came out during my class. And I remember as soon as it hit the time that they were supposed to be released, I literally got up and left the classroom with all my stuff left there except my phone. And I went outside to check the admissions decision and I had been accepted. I think I had a mini breakdown at that point. I'm not much of a crier normally, but I'm pretty sure I broke down in tears. And then I called every single person I could think of to tell them how excited I was to finally be going to real college, as I called it. Because of that acceptance, I got a mini break from school. It was short, but much needed. And so I was able to spend a little time recuperating between leaving my 2-year school and starting at Georgia Tech. And thankfully, getting that acceptance to Georgia Tech really inspired me to keep going, because at that point I felt like, okay, this is working. Like all of this work that I'm putting in, it's getting me somewhere and I'm at least moving in the right direction. And so it was a really positive change for me. And on top of that, I had met some great friends in community college. You know, it's kind of a bonding experience that you don't get at a larger school because your class sizes are smaller and the clubs are smaller. And many of you are on the same path, you know, trying to get somewhere after maybe not really doing things the right way the first time. So you actually meet a lot of people that you can bond with and study with. And I think best of all, I met this amazing man who I'm now married to. So you know, it was the best choice that I didn't have a choice in making, but it worked out really well for me in the end. So I go to Georgia Tech and I have this truly life-changing experience being there. I think a lot of students in the US take college for granted and they don't really make the best of their time there. And I understand how that happens because when you're 18, you just really don't have the perspective to appreciate the opportunity that you're getting. But I was a little bit older when I went to school at this point, and so I could look at it and see how incredible this opportunity was and how amazing it was to be able to be there on campus. I just said yes to every possible thing I could fit in my schedule. You know, because I'd been in the workforce already, I knew what was out there and I knew why I was fighting so hard for this degree. And I think a lot of students really don't have that type of perspective. They don't really have that context when they first go to college. So when I was at Georgia Tech, I said yes to everything I possibly could. I mean, I was doing academic research in an aerospace lab. I was volunteering in a makerspace. I was spending every possible moment at this automotive engineering club when I had time. And that was all on top of classes and also maintaining my part-time job. So I had a part-time job during pretty much every academic semester. I was able to move from a part-time job just in regular retail to an actual student research engineering job that was paid. And that was a huge win for me because I basically doubled my hourly rate. And now I was working in the field. I was actually getting real job experience while I was in school, and that felt so incredible because it felt like everything was coming together for me finally. But all of that, like campus involvement and engagement and extracurriculars, does come at a price. I was not able to maintain excellent grades throughout my entire time at Georgia Tech. I really had to prioritize these classes I'm going to try to get an A in. These classes, I'm gonna have to let them go because I'm out of time. That skill, being able to prioritize certain things over others, is really important, but sometimes it's hard to know what to prioritize when you're brand new to a field. And there were definitely a few classes where I feel like I probably should have prioritized them a little bit more, and I didn't figure that out until later how important that was. Cough, cough, data structures and algorithms. That did come back to bite me, and you know, eventually I had to relearn a lot of that stuff. But you know, you live and you learn and you try to reflect on the way that things have gone, and that helps you over time become better. So with this opportunity to be in 4-year school, real college as I called it, I just knew I wasn't gonna get those experiences again, maybe ever in my life. And so I really tried to take advantage of all the things that probably wouldn't be available to me after graduation. I was so unbelievably excited to walk the stage and graduate, and then COVID hit. Campus shut down, and I ended up having a virtual graduation like a lot of students did at that time. I remember putting on my cap and gown and like waving from my apartment balcony, kind of in like a very sad, humorous type of way, but you know, we made the most of it. I had already accepted a full-time software engineering job in Colorado, so I was actually in a little bit of a panic because at that time, A lot of people's offers were being rescinded. No one knew what was going to happen with COVID ongoing at that time and office closures and all of these highly disruptive things. So at the time, I was really anxious that that offer was going to get revoked. I had never even considered going to grad school. So fortunately, my offer did not get revoked. I ended up moving with my now husband out to Colorado and starting my career here in the software engineering industry. I wasn't even considering grad school, actually, so I feel like that might be a video in and of itself at some point. But for a lot of reasons, I ended up deciding to start taking classes again, first as a master's student, and then eventually I actually left my full-time software engineering job, transitioned full-time into the PhD program, which I just started last year in 2024. There was a comment online recently on a thread that I was part of, and it said something along the lines of, seeing people who have it all doesn't help, it just reinforces inadequacies. I wanted to make this video to show you guys that even people who seem like they have it all, they may have gone through some serious shit to get where they are. Don't assume that just because things are, challenging or hard for you, that they weren't also challenging and hard for someone else. It's easy to see on the outside that people look so successful and to think that it was just smooth sailing for them. But for most people, it's not smooth sailing. Don't assume that if you're struggling to get through this, that there's something wrong with you, because a lot of people struggle in this field. It's difficult. It takes focus. It takes determination, it takes grit. It can be grueling at times. But just because you got off to a rocky start doesn't mean that you can't do well or that you can't be successful or that you aren't cut out for it. All it means is that you just have a little bit to work on to get back on track. That's all. It's not that deep. You just need a little bit of time to get back on track. Give yourself that time. If I could go back and tell my younger self something, it would be to stop assuming that if I come across something challenging, that there's something wrong with me. Challenging is good. Challenging is growth. I think we all need a little bit of a reminder to get out of our own way sometimes. All right, I really enjoyed sharing that with you guys. It was a little bit cathartic for me in some ways, and I just want you to know that you don't have to take a traditional path to get somewhere. You don't have to do things perfectly the first time. You just have to recommit to getting there and focus on what you can control, focus on your own learning, and you're gonna get there, you're gonna make it, and it'll be all right.